So we are thrilled to be here, and we are very, very thrilled about the topic of the conversation. So very briefly, I'm Hala Kosyura. I'm a principal at Boston Consulting Group. I do a lot of work around customer-centric strategies in financial services across different markets. I'm thrilled to introduce my panelists. So we've got Chandula, Abeywickrema, and he is a very accomplished banker with how many, 30 years of experience? Working in multiple roles in institutions such as Haddon National Bank, which is very, very famous for many of you for a variety of reasons. And he also now serves as a strategy advisor for the National Savings Bank in Sri Lanka. He also chairs Banking with the Poor, which is the largest microfinance network in Asia. We also have Kwame Oppong, who is thrilled to have. He brings in a wealth of experience from different sectors. So he's right now with DFS, but until very recently, he was a general manager of Tigo Cash in Ghana. He also worked across retail banking. He also worked in telco. So I think that when we were putting this together, we were quite intentional about the diversity of perspectives and viewpoints to bring in. So let me kick off the discussion with doing a little bit of framing. Customer lifetime value is right now a topic that's relevant not only in developing markets, it's a topic that's trending really globally. There's lots of things to learn for the financial services sector, because one of this approach has probably been a lot more advanced in telecom sector and in retail. The way we think about it, it ties very, very closely to the topic, kind of the key theme of symposium. Customer lifetime value puts an emphasis on customer. It puts that focus on a very dynamic, longer-term approach and thinks about the holistic needs and the total portfolio of solutions that our customers need. So to link what Anne was saying in the opening remarks, there is a big shift that's happening from a very product-centric view into a much more holistic view and finding a way of tapping into the value of that relationship. On that note, I'll pass it on to panel with one of the first question. How do you think about the customer lifetime value? Is it a metric? Is it a lens? Is it a way of thinking? So Kwame, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, thank you very much, Hala. In discussing customer lifetime value, I think how you need to look at it is an approach to quantifying the future revenue streams of your customers. Typically, for purposes of decision making, when you're doing these customer lifetime value, we're sometimes trapped into looking at the immediate revenue streams, or more short-term, more product-focused. And what that does is the outcome of such an evaluation does not really give you the full holistic picture, as you mentioned, and might have a certain impact on the decisions you make. So as you're looking at customer lifetime value, the things to understand and evaluate include, for instance, a deeper understanding of who your customers are, where they are, what they are doing, right? How you're acquiring them, their needs. And all these help you better understand how to engage them. And as you're engaging them better, it ultimately results in being able to improve loyalty, improve retention, reduce cost, and the ultimate objective for a business, which would be to make some profits, right, through revenue. So that's pretty much how I look at it. And I'll give you an example with relation to that. If I were evaluating a mobile financial service customer, let's say an agricultural customer in somewhere in rural Ghana, and I was looking at only the revenue stream that they were bringing to me as a mobile financial service customer, I might be missing out on the potential benefit that it would also be bringing to the business overall. So we have an example where we run a small pilot, and in the end, 83% of customers that we onboarded also were brought on board to use a GSM service. So this is airtime transaction, this is SMS, and everything else. So as you're thinking of it, it's incumbent on you to really refocus and look at things more holistically to be able to approach customer lifetime value better.
So I think that's a terrific example. Another example that we heard from Orange was along the similar lines, that if you look at the mobile, for example, financial services very narrowly, the business case and the time to being positive bottom line was quite long. But once they started looking at the holistic needs of the customer, including their telco usage, the picture changed quite dramatically, making compelling business case. So I think it echoes your observation. But to push on this a little bit, customer lifetime value at the end of the day is quote unquote a number. It's a dollar number of the relationship that takes into account the acquisition cost, the revenue, and kind of present value of the revenue streams. And if I look at the usage of that, it could lead you to think, well, maybe I'll just focus on the top quartile of my customers where I make most of my money, and not as much on the actual more of a lower income consumers, which is highly relevant in this audience. Chandula, like, what's your reaction to that? You have a very interesting perspective there.
I think the customer value in terms of economic value, as the customers evolve economically, and that kind of economic value, the impact on an organization, or particularly financial institution, or a bank or financial institution, essentially, banks and financial institutions grow with the economic growth. So the economic value of each of the customers and the valuation of that customer as he engage with the banks or financial institutions, how impactful that value into the organization's growth and development. And that's where the customer lifetime value will begin to make absolute sense as the economy grow, the banking and the finances grow, as well as institutions grow. So that's where the customer, starting from a certain point in value and evolve into a greater point. And that's where his engagement with the banks or financial institutions will create growth opportunity for the institutions.
So when we were preparing, Chandula used the example of saying, well, if you want to reap the benefit, you have to invest upfront. You had a very, very good metaphor for this one.
What I said was, if you really want to have a good cow to milk, you need to look at the investing in the calf. And you have to look after the calf until it becomes a cow, and then you can milk it. And that time of period is an investment to make sure that the life is enhanced and value is enhanced of the as you enhance the value of the calf to become a cow. So is the case with the customers. Life value is enhanced, and its growth opportunity is have a direct impact on the organizations.
Yes. But on this one, right, so what Chandula is bringing this interesting emphasis, when you talk about customer lifetime value, the lifetime, in many ways, is the operative word, because you chose at Haddon National Bank, take a much longer term perspective. Can you tell the story?
The story relating to the background of the country, because country has faced three significant uprising, mainly with the youth uprising, where we had envisaged significant marginalization of the youth, the rural development, the gender equality, women inclusion, and all that resulted in significant economic drawbacks. And as financial institutions, what we felt was that it's important to bring development across to the rural areas, the regional areas, to the youth, and to the women. And that's where we began to look at how do we bring economic value into each of the individuals, as each individual segment is important to a financial institution's economic development. And as economic development is restricted to certain pockets, then the growth opportunities for the financial institutions are also restricted. So if you really want to have a significant growth lined up for future, then you need to make sure that development is taken across to those segments. And that's why we have started with the micro level to a small and medium, and then began to development. And we began to go beyond a 1-year balance sheet mentality into a 5-year balance sheet mentality, so that the KPIs was really changed based on that. And that began to make sense to us, because we had the cushion of 80% of your profits coming from the 20% of your customers. But when we looked at the 80%, which represents the marginalized sector, we need to invest in that sector to ensure that 20 becomes 30 and 40 and to make a value for the institution.
So you're bringing in a very important point here around shifting a bit of a focus from that immediate return, and I'm assuming many of your organization here in the room start driving to essentially financial outcomes that you need to show. And here you have an example of a very strategic decision that was put in place to really think longer term. So tell us more about how these decisions have been made. And Kwame, question for you, in this time, Sri Lanka is a quite competitive market. So there is a fight to lay the pipeline for the new clients coming in, and that's part of the focus on building that pipeline going ahead. You're in a very different market, Kwame.
Yes, and I'll talk a bit about, for the purpose of this, a bit about what happened in Ghana. And I think it's always important, as earlier speakers said today on a different panel, the role of data in all of this. Because in our case, we looked at a data-driven customer journey. Because you have to understand your customers better, and you can only do that by really harnessing the data that is available to you to be able to get that understanding that you need. And so digging a bit deeper into who our mobile money customers were, who our telco customers were, we began to get a sense of what we're really dealing with, right? And begin to sort of question some decisions and presumptions you would have. And that eventually led us to make some changes in some decisions we were making around marketing, around acquisition, which is very, very costly for mobile financial service, especially trying to push into deeper territories. And it had a very big impact on us. But as we began to pursue that role, we began to see an impact as well. I'll give you an example. After about a year, when we decided to refocus, 70%, an active mobile money customer, we learned, was actually consuming 70% more services from the other side of the business. And this is an active mobile money customer. It meant something to the broader picture. The second thing is, as we looked at making some of these changes, we began to understand how to better acquire the high-value customers. And anyone who's in a telco space knows that's the 20% you described that brings the 80% of the revenue. It's a very delicate, tread with caution sort of space. But in a matter of a year, we were able to bring on board about 65% of them, and the person responsible for actually implementing that, even post my absence, is actually in the audience. So it was very fascinating what we actually learned out of it. But this began to actually tell us the role of what data could do in terms of changing our mindset, making different decisions, and the ultimate results that it gave us. So from my perspective, I think that is something for others to look at. And that fundamental thing is what was discussed earlier, is the need for institutions to rethink and change our orientation as to how we approach customer lifetime value.
Yeah. So thank you. I think that it's exactly these kind of examples that resonate and spark attention. One from my client experience, where in the financial institution that was fairly product focused, stepping back, pulling up, and understanding how does the customer journey and across the lifetime events evolve, what are the true customer needs at each of the points, and what is the way to anticipate it, was quite a big unlock to a very practical thing that everybody strives to do, which is cross-sell. So that customer lifetime mind shift helps you unlock customer value on one hand, essentially driving more cross-sell and margin, which was in that case quite significant, but also addresses customer needs. An example of that was mining credit card analytics, so credit card transaction data, understanding what are purchase behaviors on a credit card, and figuring out if somebody shops in in the baby store, chances are they're expecting. And that creates a whole door for the new set of needs that are coming up. And that was life insurance as one, because that's the moment for truth for most families when they actually stop and think, we do truly need this product, which makes the actual acquisition much easier and creates an unlock. There's also a very high potential of upsizing the house when there's more space. And I understand that this is a different kind of global example. The needs of the customer in each of the markets would be very specific, but just highlights that point, Kwame, that you were making around analytics being a very interesting unlock to thinking a lot more holistically. Small other point, we surveyed you before the SoFI and asked you how many of you are actually proactively driving cross-sell as a part of your business agenda. And not surprisingly, kind of the number of a percentage of people who said very much or somewhat or actively was around 30. And 70% of this audience said either not at all or we're starting to dabble into it, which to us, to me signals a huge opportunity both in terms of the customer lens and unmet demand, but also opportunity to provide better services to the clients. Kwame, you mentioned a number of decisions and choices that you made differently. Can you kind of riff off that a little bit, Chandula, and also talk about what is the value of taking that lens and how, where did it lead you differently? So you mentioned a focus on some different customer segments, which you normally would not have thought about. Any other examples?
I think we began to look at the entire spectrum of the customer segments, starting from the children to the youth, the women, and to the various marginalized sectors. What we really look at is when you look at the lifetime value of a customer, it has to evolve around the affordability and accessibility of each of the customer. At any given point, based on the financial institutions framework and the mechanism, the affordability of the various products and services could mean different things. And sometimes, if you are able to come up with the financial solutions, the more affordable to more people in more places, and that creates greater accessibility. And that's where the customer value becomes very significant to each of the institutions based on the various segments. So you need to really have the tailor-made the products and services to target the various segments by making sure that your products are made affordable and accessible with the framework of where you make the transaction cost is very affordable to both sides of the dialogue, but from the customers as well as from the institutions. And that's where, because the customer lifetime value depends on each of the customers' economic value to himself, to the society, and to by larger towards the economy. So I think based on that, you can go from micro to small and medium and come up with various solutions that can bring inclusion to all the segments. Yeah. And that's what we have done.
So Chandula, to your point, when you take that approach, you figured out a way to serve segments that very often considered are just fundamentally unprofitable. So the foundation done some very interesting experimentation with the youth financial services, where there is that question of return on investment was a big one. So it's interesting you highlighting how taking on that holistic view of the total value over the long-term timeline actually drives inclusion. But it's challenging, right? So your institution has exhibited a fair amount of patience in thinking about that long term. You mentioned the view of it's not a quarterly result, it's a much more long-term view. That's a challenge. What are other big things? So first of all, how did you make that happen at the board level and at the senior leadership team level?
As I said, from a macro point of view, we look at great economic development across the country that would have an impact on the institution as well. And we also felt that it is important that each segment be made profitable, and each segment would have the opportunity to have a linkage with the institution. And also what we did was that when it comes to the youth, when it comes to the children, when it comes to the women, we ensured that there is a hand-holding for graduation of them. And as I said, that we change our strategic thinking to move from, while we have a dual kind of engagement, we have 1 year balance sheet, 1 year KPIs, we have 5 year balance sheet, 5 year KPIs. And that really began to really work on strategically. Once we look at 20% of the customers which bring 80% of the profit, and we look at 80% of the customers which bring 20%, how we have these two different, the balance sheets engagement. And based on that, we began to work towards creating affordability and accessibility of various products and services that would have significant meaning and economic impact and revenue generation impact on the short, mid, and long term. Yeah. And that's what we really invested in hand-holding. Like I said, during the period of the calf, to become a cow, you need to handhold, you need to nurture. And that's where we began to really see results year by year.
Yeah. But on this one, right, in terms of the challenges, that alignment of strategy and governance and metrics is certainly one. You spoke beautifully to it. Kwame, what are other big challenges that you are seeing? Because I would say, I would not be afraid to say that approach, customer lifetime value, has not been broadly adopted within financial inclusion space.
Yeah, you're right. It really hasn't. I mean, you've got to look at sometimes even the tenure of leadership, right? And that somehow informs the extent of commitment into certain things that are a bit more long-term in view. But then again, it comes back to the need to reorient yourself and make a decision that's actually sufficient. As much as there is this issue and a problem, how it's viewed, there is also evidence supporting the fact that taking a longer-term approach to customers is also actually happens to be more valuable. But the problem is, I think many a times we're in a lot of that sort of cone of confusion of changing dynamics in the markets, regulatory changes, competitive changes, and all kinds of KPIs within a very short-term basis. So we find it hard to sort of take a step back and respond to what should be a better approach to it. And I think what I've always recommended has been look deeper to your customers. The reason is the better you understand your customers, however you're harnessing data, and frankly, to your point, to the survey results, how many of us are truly mining that data to optimize the value out of it. And if you could really do that sufficiently, it means you understand your customers better, you understand their needs, you're addressing it better, and it's a full cycle back to the revenue that you're targeting in any case. And so it's very important that you take that step back and look at it from that perspective.
So Kwame, couldn't agree more, but to push a little bit on that, saying, well, it's hard, it's long-term. Telcos also operate under pretty strong pressure to deliver quick results. But if you contrast telecom industry versus financial inclusion, but also banking more broadly, telecom this is one of the key metrics that's being used throughout. This is what is being kind of lived and breathed. Why do you think that difference is?
I think there's a natural fit between the competitive dynamics within the telco space and just this perspective. You don't have a choice. Just in a quarter, your value could quickly evaporate if you're not careful. I'll give you an example. Since you got here, switched on your phones, I'm sure you got some kind of SMS telling you something about a network you could use here, probably the rates you could be getting. But the question is, if you ever made a transaction, a financial transaction, how many of your banks, or how many of you banks actually said anything to you? SMS, phone call, whatever it is, introduce you to a potential service that might make your financial transactions here a bit better? I don't know, right? So I think these are some of the things that as we look at reorienting ourselves, we really need to push on a bit more. Because the reason why it's working for telcos is because in their space, it's a must. Customer value management is a must. But sometimes maybe the dynamics in other industries do not necessarily compel that sort of mindsets.
Yeah. So I wonder if that is really related to the competitive nature of the markets. So Rose, in the earlier panel, was saying, well, credit is, there's such a strong demand for credit that there is a lot of ability and willingness from the customers to jump through the hoops to get it. So there's a lot of untapped demand where, even though you probably would argue that the markets are competitive, but in financial inclusion, there's still a lot of white space, where there's probably easier things to go for and go after, rather than choosing a much more harder, longer term approach. So I don't have an answer, I'm just posing a consideration, but would love to engage in the conversations offline. But talking about challenges, I wanted to throw one that I've seen quite a bit. And it's around kind of the logic that organization and structure and operating model truly influences strategy and the other way around. So an example that we brought in yesterday in our alternative delivery channels workshop was, if your center of gravity is a product P&L, and product P&L is where the decisions are truly made, that drives a lot of behavior that optimizes within each of the product silos. There's lower likelihood of really looking across, taking a customer segment lens and figuring out what their needs are. So another one that you started on, Kwame, was data. We talked about data. How hard is it to get good quality data to think about customer lifetime value?
I think the data is absolutely critical. That constitutes your dashboard for your journey. And I think at each turn and twist, you need to really make critical decisions. And that's where the importance of data with regard to in every aspect. And particularly here in the customer lifetime, it's a journey. And that's where you need to make sure this customer begin to make economic value at each turn and twist of the institution's journey as well as the customer's journey. So I think the more and more banks and financial institutions are working very much on creating that framework and the mechanism to obtain correct data and then assess it and create that as the dashboard for decision making.
Yeah, which also probably pushes you down that very specific segmentation route in terms of both the income bands, but also other characteristics. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I would love to budget a little bit of time for Q&A. We hope that would be helpful. But before we go there, wanted to elevate this and saying, like, any advice to the practitioners in the room, if they were to start going down that route of thinking about applying customer lifetime value lens, what would you say?
Okay, so my first thing will be to sincerely recommend that your current reality is that the markets will not evolve to your models. You're going to have to figure out how to evolve your models to the market. That's very important. And you need to make it a point to invest yourself as a business or any form of organization to understand data. It's the only way you can understand who you're dealing with, what you're working with, and ultimately be able to reach your objectives. So that's the big takeaway that I hope the audience takes.
Yeah, I mean, one has to look at that any financial institution or bank is a small entity in a larger canvas, which is the society and the economy. And you need to make sure that if your society and the economy is enrich and grow, then you also can survive. And I think in that context, you need to really make sure that you really look at the society and the customer and begin to make an investment on that on the long term. And that's where the value of the customer to himself economically, to the society economically, and to the economy itself. And then because of the bank and the financial institutions are so interwoven with the economy, it's very important to look at that way as the customer value. And I think when you really handhold and graduate the customer, definitely you are also enriched along with the customer.
Yeah. I think it's very inspiring. And you quoted a McKinsey report in the morning that basically says how much value can be unlocked by financial including. From BCG perspective, our sustainable economic development work basically also shows how financial inclusion overall translates into well-being. So I think that's one of the big reasons why we're here, bringing in the customer viewpoint and how it benefits the customer, bringing in the financial inclusion viewpoint and what's good for the society, but also, I serve, among others, large banks. There is also that other component of economic value for the financial service provider if you do it right. So on that note, I thought we could open it up to the room. There's a question right there, if you can pass on the mic.
Thank you. Interesting discussion. Gerard Kosyura from SIGAP. I've heard about customer lifetime value now, and I think it's great that we've put it on the stage and on the podium and discuss it. But that means value for the firm. And then you also mentioned value for society. But the one thing I haven't heard is what value is there for the customer, and how do you link value for the customer with value to the firm?
So I believe in, so if you don't mind, I'll get started on this one. I firmly believe in the ability to break compromises, right? But just let's be clear, customer lifetime value, strictly speaking, is a lens and a tool. You can use it for good or you can use it for not so good. I've seen it used by saying, okay, these are our most profitable customers. We're only going to use this, and we're going to decrease the amount of services for the lower income segments. It's a choice that an organization can potentially make, but it's up to the board and the management on which way to go. But I'm a believer, and I've seen that play out quite a bit, that taking that approach, and Kwame was very eloquent about providing examples of a really truly understanding customer and anticipating their needs that benefits them. An example of providing, let's say everybody wants to mobilize savings. If you believe that savings is a great product for the customer, and we all know, and we spend entire morning saying all our customers should be saving more. And that becomes a true value unlock, and you start getting very specific and creating, from the FSP perspective, to put it crudely, cross-selling more savings products. From the customer, building a savings cushion that everybody in this room and in this country and this world truly requires. So my push on this one, you can make it just for the benefit of FSP. But if you do it right, and you do it with the customer needs in mind, I think we've seen it play out many times of how great for the customer it is as well.
Yeah,
any?
I think the actual, as I mentioned also, each customer, there is economic value for each of the customer. And as you grow that, then he will determine the value that he makes to the institution as well as the society and the economy. And it is very important in this regard that the institutions kind of tailor-made affordability and accessibility to the customers. Now, for instance, a corporate lender, micro-entrepreneur may not be a value. But where is an institution which has a spectrum of services from micro to small and medium, that each of those segments is value. So that's where, based on the organization's diversity of products and services, the determination of the custom value is made. So even a micro-entrepreneur is value at a different level to that institution. So, for instance, it depends on the story or the engagement, economic engagement of the financial institution, that the value is determined. And also each customer has a significant value. It determines the denomination, the measure that you make.
Okay, and I'll just add a little bit to what Hala said earlier. The whole point about investing in understanding your customers is to be able to understand their needs better and to be able to serve them better. And the outcome of that you expect should be satisfaction, which ultimately leads to loyalty and retention, etc. Now, that is a way to actually meet both the customer's value expectations as well as a business value expectation as well. Yeah. So I would suggest that as a way to also look at it.
I love the point that you're making, Kwame, because even you, very pragmatically, you look at the formula of what customer lifetime value is, and there is a huge component of retention are the opposite of attrition. Customers leave when they're unhappy. Customers switch when the quality of services provided are not great. And if you think about some of the gold standard customer-focused organization in FI, this is the metric that they live and breathe every day at all levels, from the branch teller all the way to the CEO, which translates and kind of plugs in very neatly into this point of view.
Gloria Melekom, Ghana, operators of Tigo. My question goes to, let me say, the three of you, including you, the moderator. At what stage of the customer's journey do you have to revisit the lifetime value process? Because it's a journey and they might fall off at some point. So at what stage of the customer's journey do you have to revisit the lifetime value process, especially in the mobile financial service space?
I'll put you in the hot seat.
Okay. I think generally it's, besides, at every stage, there's some form of evaluation of the customer's value to you. Competitive dynamics change, the opportunities to cross-sell change, introduction of new products change, and all these have one or more impacts on the customer's lifetime value. So I think it's a continual process. But nonetheless, I also think at any point in time, some strategic decision needs to be made around what to do, where to go, how much to invest, or whether to invest at all. And looking at whatever the lifetime value assessment or what that value is at that point in time, at least can help you make that decision. But it's very important that you continue to focus on this as an ongoing process. It really changes your perspective of even the need to re-inject investment or whether to pull back a bit. It's all very, it's an ongoing process.
And I will get a little technical on this one for a second, because there are a bunch of assumptions, as in any type of metric, because it looks into the future, it projects the value of the relationship going forward. So I would say, when should you really dramatically reconsider it? If your margins on your products shift quite dramatically, that would certainly change the answer. If your competitive environment shifts quite a bit, that really changes the value. So you always need to be mindful and kind of best back test it and keep in line saying, well, are the assumptions that we made up front, and you always have to, have they changed fundamentally? So it's not a solid thing that's set in stone, but I think this is something that's worth tracking.
I think it's important when you have this dashboard at each point, when you are creating value to the customers, that value creation is assessed. And then there is no you can do that at each point of the journey. You don't have to restrict it. As long as you have access to data and the dashboard, you can really assess the customer's value at each turn and each twist. And thereby you could really bring new innovations, new ideas to further add value and graduate him.
And we have, I believe, time for one more question.
I want to ask a question. My name is Natasha Gorania, and it's a question that the last time we met in Sri Lanka, we talked about a specific target population, and it's just remained very close to my heart. And I wonder if over the years, as you've gotten the data and started to understand the market better, whether you have started to go down market. We talked about the financial inclusion of the T-state workers, that there are about 1 million of in Sri Lanka who are woefully excluded and really underpaid. And I know it's a question I should have probably saved for coffee break, but I'm going to misuse the microphone.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important issue that you brought in. I think this particular segment, the estate workers, what is significantly important is the financial education that need to be put across to them. And that's exactly most of the financial institutions are bringing, because this is one of the marginalized communities, and leave alone the financial education, they have a significant challenges with regard to the normal literacy, and that's where a lot of NGOs and other institutions are working on various areas of social development side. And from that point, that we could see number of banks and financial institutions moving towards the financial education before they really bring the engagement through the financial inclusion.
Hi, it's Mike Malan from CompuScan. Just in context, we run the credit bureau in Uganda, and a lot of what we get involved with is analytics on customer retention, trying to help the banks in terms of that maximizing the relationship and the ongoing sale and that customer value. So I've really enjoyed this particular presentation, but equally some of the previous discussions around data analytics. And I really just wanted to contribute to what you're talking about, is that it's one thing to make the statements, but if you don't have the skills internal to analyze the data, or you don't have your data properly structured and laid down, it's very difficult to understand how to cross-sell to that customer. And a lot of what we're finding in the credit bureau environment and context is that the banks there's a lot of switching within the market, and we're having to come up with products and solutions to try and help banks to say, how do I know who's a good customer of mine? And I just thought that it was perhaps a relevant contribution to make.
No, I think this is absolutely terrific comment. It's kind of a bit of a plug. When we talked about what are the big hurdles, the capability, and what you're describing about ability to really run data analytics, not just availability of data. It's about capability to make good use of that. It's a terrific plug for partnership. Love it.
And maybe let me just add something to that a bit. And you're right, the internal capacity is always a challenge, especially depending on the size of the operation. But at least in the past, we've been fortunate to have partners who are willing to support us. But I think what you're also beginning to see, and I've seen a couple of members in the audience who come from provide such services, there are actually organizations you can partner with to help you overcome that technical capacity limitation you may have internally. And so as you're speaking and meeting people, I think seek some of these individuals out and get a sense of how you can partner. But it's very important that if you don't have the internal capacity, you look to partner with someone who can.
Okay. And so I think on this note, Kwame, hats off. You basically got us right on time. So I just wanted to thank the esteemed panel and for your questions. They were all very, very terrific. Thank you.